Welcome to Goldfish on Games, and hopefully you remember this machine, the McIntyre 486, as we spent a whole episode getting it working and playing games, but nothing we could do could get the mouse to work, or to get a sound card to work either. And you know what? I was happy that we got it running, but I wasn't happy that those still required fixing. And so I've spent the last month or so trying to get that to work. And I looked at the motherboard in more detail. I even looked at replacing the serial I/O card as well to see if that was a problem. But in the end, I decided it was most likely the power supply. And the main reason for this is both the serial I/O controller and the sound card require the positive and negative voltage rails. And with more power going in, it is more of a chance that one of those could be at fault. Here we have the current PSU and the motherboard. And if you're used to a modern system, you might not recognise the power connector. It's these set of pins. And these plugs are known as the P8, P9 or the AT power connector. And there's nothing in the design that allows you to know which plug goes into which set of pins. The rule of thumb is that the ground wires, the black ones, should be next to each other when connected. With this connector we can't just easily go out and buy a new PSU, as they all come with the now standard 20+4 connector. Thankfully this is still quite common in some industrial equipment, and so you can actually go out and buy a converter. And this just clips into a standard ATX power supply. Now you might have noticed the two wires hanging from the harness, and these are to connect to the power switch, as the AT supplies were directly connected to its switch. And as is typical, these connectors don't actually fit my switch, so I'm having to actually use the jacket to hold them on. Even with that harness, I was going to have to be choosy when picking a PSU, because most modern ones will have that one big fan that when placed inside this case would end up pointing straight up, and that would not be great for keeping it cool. So I ended up finding one that had a fan at the front and back. Now unfortunately that will mean there's slightly less room inside that case to work with, but it will actually keep it cool, which is a bonus. I also tried to find one that had the negative 5V rail, but unfortunately because PCI and PCI Express don't require it, it's become very difficult. So the one I have doesn't have it. So let's just hope that the serial I/O controller and the sound card that I have don't require it. With everything stuffed back in the case, it was time to turn it on, and because I'd forgotten to plug in any of the LEDs or speakers, I wasn't going to get any sound or any notifications until something came up on the screen. And hey, it's booting, which is definitely a good sign. It means that there's definitely power. And time to load the mouse driver and edit, and booyah! The mouse works. Oh yes! It was just the power supply all along. Well, let's try out a few games. And I think Frontier, seeing that we showed this off before, and it wasn't particularly playable with just the keyboard, and yep, works nicely in the menus. And takeoff time. And seeing we're just messing around quickly, let's just take out this other ship. Or take ourselves out, which is most likely to happen. Amazingly, the reason it took so long to make this video and get it all working was actually just waiting for that converter harness to arrive. Gotta love the shipping from China. And with the mouse working, it's time to install Windows, so let's break out the floppy disks and the idiot's guide to Windows 3.1 and get going. And did you know that the average postal worker gets bitten 3.1 times a year? Now I have to confess, I don't think I've ever actually installed Windows 3.11 before, and outside of a few uses at schools, I've never really used Windows 3 much either, so this is really breaking new ground for me. And it didn't take long before we were booting into the desktop, and so far everything's looking pretty good, or at least to my untrained eye. And even the mouse works, though I have to admit I did install a driver off the floppy disk that came with this mouse, just to be sure. So it's time to do what everyone does when they got a fresh install, play Minesweeper. And I'll be the first to admit that my Minesweeper skills have gotten very rusty over the years. As I mentioned, I don't really know all that much about this operating system, so I don't know what hidden gems there might be. So if you know of a really great title that would only run on Windows 3, and you think it's a bit of a hidden gem, let me know, because otherwise I'm just going to play Minesweeper and Solitaire. And while they're fun games, there has to be more to life than Minesweeper and Solitaire. Though I have to admit, I have wasted many an hour and many an afternoon with these games in the past. With the mouse working and Windows fully installed, it was time to crack on, and it was time to try out a sound card. In this instance, it was going to be the Sound Blaster 16, as it's a good classic card that should fit really well with this machine. The card, all the size of a small skateboard, slotted in pretty easily, and it was like it was made for this machine. And after quickly screwing it in, we were ready to get going. And yes, I actually only realised after screwing this card in that I forgot to screw in the VGA card. So audio cable in, and time to start messing around with Sound Blaster diagnostics to make sure it's connected and to test it out, as this is where it failed previously.
8-bit testing.
Oh, that's a glorious, glorious sound.
16-bit testing. 16-bit testing.
Even better. Oh, and some MIDI goodness. Oh yes, I am very happy about this. Time to update the autoexec.bat and restart. So it's time to boot up a game and see if it works. Now if you remember from the last video, I showed off Magic Boy, which had the option of having Sound Blaster sound. Oh, just listen to that. I'm not sure if that's MIDI or some weird mod tracker, but it sounds significantly better than the PC speaker. So much digital sound goodness. Oh yes, this is what this machine was missing. I think it's time to try another game, and a classic. MIDI and digital sounds goodness. It might run at 2 frames an hour, but it's still a great game. As I have a number of DOS games that only came on CD and a spare CD-ROM drive, I figured it'd be a waste not to put it inside. The front bay cover pops off quite easily. It was time to start getting the CD drive prepped. So first in, the audio cable, because a lot of those games required it for the music. Now annoyingly, the IDE cable wouldn't quite reach, so I had to get an extension cable. So that was another month-long wait for that to arrive. And that goes in quite easily. And then I have to start digging around for a spare power connector. This machine is already starting to get a bit of a mess. And the PSU is already starting to get in the way. That big chunky fan at the back really does cramp up the space in there. And we connect the audio cable to the sound card, and we're pretty much done. Now I have to admit, this is where having the main drive being on a compact flash card and easily removable has come in handy, as I was able to copy the drivers for the CD-ROM drive straight to the card. I was also able to copy over the drivers for the Sound Blaster device as well, because I didn't have a CD or floppy disk for that. It also meant it was very easy to find the exact command line I needed to set up the drive, as boy, I couldn't remember that back in the day, let alone trying to put it in now. It also meant I was able to look up exactly how to set up the machine to have the most amount of conventional RAM. A lot of these commands I don't remember from back in the day, but then I only really dabbled in DOS. I wasn't particularly great at it, and I think I'm much better now than I ever was back then. So with everything in theory configured, it was time to try out that game that's been in the background the whole time, Desert Strike. I've got the CD here, and let's open up the drive and try it out. Now the drive feels pretty nice to use, and it's trying to spin the disc up, so this is sounding good so far. Now let's try switching over to it. And if we attempt to list the directory, it really spins up, and we get a directory listing. Awesome, let's install it. Let's go to the C drive. Yeah, Desert sounds fine to me. Let's do a quick install just to get it going, and let's start it up. And hey, we have video and sound. This is absolutely amazing. When I tried this on my Pentium 200 machine, all the digital sounds were garbled. I got the MIDI music at least, but everything else was garbled, so it was really annoying to play. So it's interesting to see that an older machine can play some games that the newer machines, even when it comes to DOS, can't play. Let's quickly skip past all those cutscenes and let's get into the game proper, which is really taking the time to load off the CD. Oh, and we're in game. Weapons armed. And listen to those sound effects. Now I have to admit, this is the first time I've really played it on DOS. Unlike most people, I actually played the Amiga version the most, and that was the one I loved. But it does look like they used the graphics from the Amiga version, so this is giving me some heavy nostalgia. Now the last thing to do is to plug in all those connectors that I forgot to do earlier. And once I finish untangling these cables, I can then plug in the power LED. You can never be sure which way round these go, and finally the reset switch. Now surprisingly, the hard drive LED actually connects to the serial I/O card. Now you might remember the LCD display on the front that showed the speed. Well, that's just powered by these two pins, and these were part of a special connector that was on the previous PSU, but is obviously not on this one. So it's time to jerry-rig something, because I really like the look of that LCD panel, even if it is mostly pointless. Let's power it up to see if everything works, and yes, it looks like it does. And if you're interested about that LCD, you actually set the speed via a set of jumpers on the LCD board itself. It's quite a complex looking thing, and at some point I may have to take it out to show it off. But I have to admit, everything's looking pretty damn good. With the machine running really quite nicely now, I decided there wasn't much in the way of upgrades that I wanted to do. Yes, I could put a faster CPU or more RAM inside, but the games I want to play seem to run nicely. So why bother changing it? Plus, it acts as a nice middle ground between the 8088 laptop and my Pentium tower. Now you might be asking, will we see this machine again? Well, time, feedback, and games that will only run on this machine will tell. And so until next time, I've been the Goldfish, that is a fully working McIntyre 486, and this has been Goldfish on Games. Bye. While I'm playing a bit of Desert Strike, you can subscribe or check out similar videos via the on-screen links. I typically put out at least 2 videos a month, which range from restoring gaming hardware to reviewing games. So thank you for watching.